Hey guys, Brian Hilliard here, author of the best-selling book, Networking Like a Pro. And I got to tell you, I am fired up here today. We have got ourselves a treat. We are going to be talking with Sarah Lynes. She is a quiet self-belief coach. She is coming to us from the UK. Sarah, thanks so much for stopping on by. We really appreciate it.
You're so welcome, Brian. It's a joy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. 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 Well, listen, one of the things that we were talking about when we met on LinkedIn, we chatted a little bit. And one of the things that I really just kind of jumped up at me was this idea of a quiet self-belief coach. So tell us a little bit about, maybe unpack that for some of our listeners, because I think if I were a betting man, I would say that's probably not something that they've heard of before.
Cool. I'd be delighted to share that with you. Okay, so I kind of started my business in February, March this year, which was just before lockdown, as you'll remember. And so I started doing a lot of online networking, lots and lots of Zoom calls, lots of lovely groups of predominantly women, so lots of women's networking. And what I found as I went through all these calls was that I could really read the energy so cleanly on the screen. It was different to being in a room. And I've always been an introvert, myself, one of the quiet ones, and one of the ones who in a meeting would probably not speak up. But I found it a little bit different on these calls, and I noticed two things. The first one was that lots of people would say to me during the call or afterwards, "You're very calming. You bring my heart rate down," one lady said, which I thought was just wonderful, right? And I've never had that feedback in my life before. I can be a bit giddy, so it wouldn't have occurred to me to think I could be calming. So that was the first big thing for me. And the second thing that I noticed was we're all so different, right? So there are lots of coaches who are quite exuberant and passionate and positive and quite busy. And I found, lovely though they are, that they would exhaust me quite quickly as an introvert myself. And what I noticed, and I could see the energy in the room, is that other people were also just taking a little step back from that energy. But when I spoke, those same people would kind of sit forward and be a bit more engaged.
Right.
And as I got chatting with them, I realized that my calming energy is a little bit more of what they need. And at the same time, being able to tie in some of the stuff I've been through, which is all around self-doubt, and knowing that I got the tools to build self-belief in these quieter women. And quiet isn't something that is typically valued in society. It is more now, but over the years, the extroversion and the bounciness has been what's been really praised and valued. And we kind of worry about our quiet children, and we don't necessarily take account of the quiet people. So self-doubt is a little bit easier for us to find when we are quiet. So those things kind of all pulled together for me and really just locked into place. And when you just know that that's where you need to be in life, that was such an exciting point. And I'm really grateful to have gone through this time because, as I say, the energy on the screen allowed me to see it in a way that I might not have done in a room. So that was a wonderful thing.
We talked a little bit about that too before our call last week. And we were talking about the idea of engaging people. There's a difference when you're engaging people through a face-to-face event, right? Versus what you were talking about with on like Zoom or something like that, a video conference. And, I agreed with you. I definitely think that there is a degree of, you used the word clean, I used the word direct feed. You could definitely see where it was coming from. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think when you talk about quiet self-belief coach, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like when you say quiet self-belief coach, I think what you're having a conversation around self-confidence and maybe even communication a little bit. I don't know.
Definitely self-confidence, Brian. That's all it's about. It's about having that belief in yourself. And I genuinely think it can be a very quiet thing. It's not necessarily something we need to change and go out and shout about.
Right.
And it's almost, for me, I sometimes talk about it in terms of core strength, but I'm not talking about your abs. I'm talking about just that deep knowing that you're okay and that you're strong, and you don't need to shout that when you've got it.
Right, right. You know, one of the things that I'm a big football man, American football, and one of the things that they say is when you score a touchdown, you know, you see all these people do all these different things and whatnot like that.
Mm.
And one of the points that they say is the veterans say, you know, listen, act like you've been there before. You know what I mean? Like, I remember, where was this? This was in not college, in high school. I played football,
Mm.
and I only scored one touchdown. And I remember, I remember I scored the touchdown, and you know, you see everybody doing like all these like moves and stuff like that. I didn't do any of that. I remember I had the ball, and I fortunately, it just instinct kicked in. I didn't like jump around or anything like that. I did the football, and I don't know if you've ever seen it. You can spin it. You can like spin it like a top if you grab it right,
Okay.
because it's oblong, and you can spin it like a top, but you have, because it's on a field and not on like the ground, you really have to get it right. Like you have to spin it right.
Yeah.
So fortunately, I had, I guess, practiced a little bit, and and I don't know what happened. I got the ball, I went like this, and I spun it, and I walked away.
Oh, amazing. I love that. That is strong.
Right,
Nice.
right. So you can do something that is of a celebratory nature without necessarily feeling like you have to go over the top. And I think, you know, when we talked before, that the takeaway that I have, at least for me, one of them is that, again, you can be successful, you can be confident, you can be strong, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in a way that Western society, because I think our Eastern society friends would say that they'll know what we're talking about, because actually they've been doing this since, you know, Genghis Khan times. But on the Western world, I think
Mm.
that a lot of people, you know, could definitely pick up with this. Tell us a little bit about your
Mm.
story and maybe how you kind of got started doing this, because I think you were in HR before, if I'm not mistaken, in corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I started my career and I spent most of it in one business actually. And it was a fast growing, really energetic entrepreneurial business. And quite early on in that business, so I was there 15 years
Okay.
and I was there when it was a tiny, tiny business. There were four of us. Quite early on, there was some opportunities came up because in a growing business, new roles, and I wasn't offered the new opportunities. And I never got a degree. And I didn't allow myself to apply for the new opportunities. So, what I kind of made that mean was I'm not big enough, and nobody else thinks I'm big enough to progress in this business. And I made that mean I can't do any better than I'm doing. And I really sat with that for such a long time. I was a real victim, Brian, and you'll know the drama triangle, right? You could just have drawn me in that bottom corner. I was a proper victim. And then I became, I suppose, maybe a caricature of myself.
Right.
And even if I'd have wanted to break out, which I kind of did, I knew I could do more. So it was like a
Right.
part of me knowing I can do more, and then this part of me going, but I can't step up.
Right.
Plus, I've been so quiet and so small for so long. How could I step up in front of these people?
Right.
So there was a lot going on there, a lot of a tangle, and it just felt kind of a bit impossible.
Right.
And I did move around. I moved roles within the company, but just to whatever the company needed, right? They just
Right.
said, oh,
Right.
can you now do this? And I was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. Um, anyway, I got to a point maybe 10, 12 years in when they asked me to train as HR. And although I wouldn't have chosen it, I actually loved this part. This was the best bit for me and loved learning so much about the people. That was the really important bit, was looking after the people. So that was an absolute joy for me. And I started to feel like I was getting somewhere. And one of the things we did as part of my learning and also part of growing the business was we brought a coach into the organization.
Right.
And I'd never seen a coach before. Like, this was a
Right.
whole new thing. And this would have been, I knew straight away that this was what I needed 12 years ago.
Right.
And if I'd have had a coach around me then, or had a manager who was acting like a coach, so with that kind of coaching culture within the organization,
Right. Right.
I know that would have just flipped a switch in me to become what I needed to be.
Right.
So straight away, I thought, this is what I want to do, because I want to help people who've been where I've been to kind of grow in the way that they absolutely can do, with just
Right.
sometimes we need a little nudge, right?
Right. Right.
So that was huge, and it was felt like coming home for me. So I went through my coaching training, which I loved, and at the same time I found myself a coach to work specifically on my self-belief. And what's wonderful about that, and you know this, the coaching doesn't happen right there in a room for an hour. The
Right.
coaching kind of happens over months afterwards, and
Right.
weeks after,
Right.
years afterwards, right?
Right.
So it's like
Right.
meditation. People say, it's the benefit of meditation is not when you meditate, it's because you meditate. And
Right.
I
That's
think,
a great way. I actually haven't
yeah,
heard that before. That's interesting,
it's
but I agree
lovely,
with it.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so true when you think about
Yeah.
coaching.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, you might make some strides forward in the session,
Right.
but more likely, it's the whole months afterwards that
Right.
you
Because
do the
it almost,
transformation.
it almost, if you don't mind me just interjecting for a second, because
Mm.
that's a really good point. It's almost like it's a culture, and what it creates is a culture inside of you, which is preceded by an approach. So you have a way of doing things, you have coaching, you have a change in approach, and then you have a resultant culture. And that, to your point, doesn't happen just, you know, let me knock out a session like I would mowing a lawn. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I can certainly see the difference in me
Mm,
over the last 3 years since I started my journey of being a coach and being
mm-hmm,
coached.
mm-hmm,
And Brian, if you'd have asked me even 6 months ago to come on a
mm,
podcast with you, I would have been under my desk.
right.
No way would I have done that. But when I
Right.
look at the things that I've done over the last 6 months, so I've been running my own workshops, I've
Mm-hmm,
been the speaker at some networking events, I've
mm-hmm,
done all sorts of things that I just never would have done. And it feels wonderful to
mm-hmm.
be in this space and not in that small, quiet, hidden space that I was in
Mm-hmm.
before.
You,
So I know it works, and that's what I want to share with my right people, this journey of doing this.
well, what's interesting, I was jotting some notes down while you were talking. You used the term "what I made it mean." You actually used it twice, or at least I heard it twice.
Mm, yeah.
And we have a lot of people who are maybe listening, maybe not, but I know there's a lot of people who I talk a lot about getting yourself out to a wider audience. The conversation, as you know, that I like to have is what can you do to expand your reach and impact more lives, and do so in a way that's not pushy or salesy? Because I think, here in the United States, there's this kind of avant-garde approach of doing things that I don't agree with. And then there's also this idea that that's the only way to do it, right?
Mm,
And it's almost like a little bit of the same problem, but from a different perspective. It's almost maybe like a through the looking glass, because what you're talking about is the idea that you're quiet, and it's okay. I need to be able to be strong and be empowered and be confident and show others how to do that through that way. And what I'm talking about is, okay, we need to be able to get out into a wider audience and impact more lives, but let's do that from a way that's less, um, you know, overt, not even overt, that's the wrong word, but less in your face, less,
mm,
whatever, because you have to be overt. Someone has to know you're on the podcast, right? But like
sure.
less in your face and less, flashy, actually showy. That's the word I'm looking for. And
Mm,
I think that when you're talking about, this idea of what you made it to mean, the point that I was getting at is that there's a lot of people who are listening, I think now, who are like, boy, you know what, Sarah, I want to play bigger. I'm in my coaching practice, because we have a lot of coaches and consultants, service practitioners listening.
mm,
I'm in my coaching practice. I want to play bigger. You're telling me that you did this, this, and this in order to do that. You're speaking, you're doing some other things. Here's my question. What would you tell these folks who maybe are listening now, who maybe do want to do some video, or maybe who do want to start blogging more, or maybe who want to come on the show, whether it's mine or somebody else's? Like, what would you tell them as a way of really, if you don't mind me saying, getting out of their own way?
sure. No, I love that question. And I get this question, so you'd be pleased to know I have an answer for you. So, so I think that, but there's two key things. Okay, so self-doubt, which is like I've held myself back with self-doubt for most of my life. So I've learned a lot of about self-doubt, and especially from a neuroscience point of view, because I kind of love knowing how things work, and that has the effect for me of like normalizing it. So as soon as I started to learn these things, I was like, oh, it's not just me, it's how my brain works, and understanding that means I can start to make some changes. So the first thing is to realize that anything that is scary or new actually kind of shuts down the really good functions of your brain. So that's not helpful. So in order to get around that, we need to treat things. We don't need to, right? This is a choice, an absolute choice here. But you could treat things as an experiment. And that takes away the risk. It takes away that big, scary newness, because it's like no big deal, right? So, you know, I wonder what would happen if I said something that felt a little bit uncomfortable in a meeting. I wonder what would happen if I said yes to Brian inviting me on his podcast. I wonder what would happen if. And that really, really takes away the scariness, because it's like, doesn't matter what happens. And then you can just make a note of what happens. And likely what will happen is nothing bad goes wrong. Nothing bad happens.
Right.
So you can start to go, oh, that went okay. That went maybe even well. Right. And we can start to layer those things on. And by really making a note of them, so first thing is noticing and then making a note. And I think literally writing these things down as evidence. And evidence has become a huge word for me.
Okay.
You know, stuff I've learned from my coach, who's wonderful in this field, but just talking about evidence. So noticing what went well, because our neural pathways, they want to be negative, right? We all have a negative bias. So going to, have you heard the quad bike in a muddy field analogy for neural pathways?
No.
But you'll know what a quad bike is.
Yeah.
And you've been in a muddy field, right? So neural pathways are like a quad bike track in a muddy field.
Right.
And that's the easiest thing. And especially when we're feeling a little bit of risk or self-doubt, then we go into our autopilot. We stay on our same track. We stay on our same neural pathways.
Okay.
If you then decide, so that could be, I'm not good enough. I'm not one of the grown-ups. There's no way I'm doing that. And that can just go on a loop. And it's very, very easy and safe and great. Nice, safe place to be. If you then decide that you want to do something a little bit different, it means creating a new neural pathway. Easy for me to say.
Right.
And that is like trying to get your quad bike into a different path.
Right.
On a muddy field, and that's hard.
I've heard of this, not the way you've described it, but I like it. I like it. I'm totally, yeah.
And it's easy to slip back into the old ruts because well, we've done it, right? Or a mountain bike or whatever it is.
Right.
And in order to make that new path as strong as the old one, you've got to keep repeating it.
Right.
So that's how the evidence helps. So to keep going, oh, I did that okay. I did that okay. I did that well. And noticing, and it feels a bit hard to start with. And then once you get into your rhythm, you do create those new paths. And what I love about this, without any kind of bragging, is like, I'm proof that it works.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the points that we made is everything happens this way that's supposed to. You know what I mean? Yeah. And when you understand that, you recognize that, like your HR story, for example, you know, it started off with intentions that may or may not have been with you in mind, you know, and then it went into you getting something out of it where it was almost like if that hadn't happened, you know, maybe you wouldn't have been where you are today, or maybe you wouldn't have been where you are today right now. And it's interesting hearing people's story, you know, kind of around that. Talk to us about, because I want to wind up with this point and then we'll finish up. Talk to us a little bit about empowerment, because this was one of the points that we brought up earlier when we were talking, which is this notion, and we've touched on it a little bit here, which is that, you know, when you're feeling empowered as a person who maybe is a little bit more quiet or a little bit less extroverted, there's a tendency to feel disempowered. And this gets back to the point that I was making earlier, where, the previous question was about how do you get out there if you haven't done it before? And your answer is evidence, get past the self-doubt, neural pathways, and you gave a good example. So now that we're going through this, how can we as people who are listening, who maybe do not feel as empowered to do something, what can we do to kind of move forward in that regard to empower ourselves to be more successful? Because I think everybody at the end of the day wants to be able to impact more lives. I think how we choose to do it as a coach is what's different.
Yeah, great question. I'll tell you what's worked for me. So the thing that's worked for me is to be me. And I have a wonderful quote, which it used to be on our office wall, and I hated it because I didn't understand it at all. But I love it now, and I share it a lot. And this quote is, if I get this right, some people will like me and some people won't. So I might as well be me. And then I know that the people who like me.
Right.
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 And for me going forwards, how I've used this is to not try to be somebody else. And I don't try to necessarily have all my words in the right order, because it doesn't matter. And if I put something out on the internet, so I'll share on social media, I'll share videos and I'll share posts, that they don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be me.
Right.
And maybe I say things that people won't agree with, and that's okay.
Right.
And about, I suppose, knowing that some people will be right for me.
Right.
And that everybody else can pass by. That's okay.
Right.
They don't need to stop and listen. They don't need to engage. They don't need to coach with me. But you'll know this as a coach, you want your clients to really connect with you. You don't want to put something out there into the world, and then when they arrive in the coaching room with you, you're something different.
Right.
And somebody said to me a while ago, it's a little bit like just sitting and saying what you want to say and waiting and seeing who comes to sit with you to listen.
Right. Right.
And I suppose then having a little bit of detachment to then who actually does come and sit and listen, because not everybody will. And
Right.
you could make that be an awful thing. You could make that be, oh, well, why doesn't everybody want to listen to me?
Right. Right.
That's not how people work. So it's just, and I know authenticity is maybe an overused word, but it is just that about being me. I don't know if that helps, Brian, but
No,
that's...
that does. I was actually going to say authenticity definitely is the right word. And I would also have another one with an A, which is alignment. What you're putting out there, what I heard is what you're putting out there is in alignment with who you are. And, for people, I think, who, again, are trying to get their word out and reach more folks and impact people and do, different things, whatever it's speaking or not, webinars or not, videos or not, podcasts or not. I think that what happens is there is this fear. We're back to that self-doubt point that you brought up a few minutes ago. I think there's this fear that there is, you brought up a few things, a fear of a mistake, a fear of not doing it right, which is a little bit different, a fear of being different. There's these different fears that are out there. And one of the things that I try to tell people is that, listen, it can seem a little scary. I totally understand that, but you are absolutely in control of how you show up. You are in control of how you show up. You are in control of the message that you put out. You are in control of how big or small you ultimately decide to play. You are in control of the people's lives you impact and the overall empowerment that you're able to take for yourself and give to others. All of that you're in control of. Now, if you decide not to do anything about it, then that's not my problem, nor is it yours. But what happens is a lot of people, they come from this place of, oh, well, I'm just going to let this, to your point, oh, well, I'm kind of quiet, so I'm not going to really this because of that. And then I'm going to fall back on this. And what you're saying is, listen, the proof is in the pudding. You can empower yourself. But I think what you're saying is the overall takeaway, and, jump in here, but the overall takeaway is that it starts with being able to, well, maybe it starts with having a belief, which continues with reducing the self-doubt, which then leads to the evidence-based point that you said before, which then leads to a new level of action and activity, which gets us to that neuroscience point in terms of the ruts. I don't know if you would agree with that. I don't know if I got that right,
Absolutely.
actually.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And one of the things I talk a lot about, Brian, is that it's a journey, and
Okay.
it's not a quick journey necessarily to go from quiet and small, hidden, self-doubty person to being able to, be out there a little bit in your own way, maybe even believe in yourself enough to listen to what it is that you want in your life, because that's part of self-belief, standing up for even what do you want to watch on TV when you're in a family. Do you always say, hey guys, this is what I want to watch, or do you go,
Right.
it's fine, like everybody else can choose ahead of me? So
Right.
the journey from one to the other is a winding one, I'll be honest. There are some loop the loops in there, but yeah, it is it's entirely possible.
Good.
It's entirely
Good, good,
possible.
good.
And sometimes what we need, Brian, is somebody with us. And I shared this analogy with you when we chatted, and I know it's
Right.
one that you like. So I cycle a little bit, and I've got a keen cyclist, my husband. So we watch the Tour de France sometimes, and no doubt some of your listeners do as well. So we can all picture the peloton of riders who are together and giving each other energy, and they're in it, right, as a pack. And the way that I think about my client is that she's probably just fallen off the back of the peloton,
Right.
and those riders drop back quickly because it's a
Yep.
mental thing as much as anything. So yeah, you've lost a bit of power in your legs, but mentally, whew, those guys are way ahead now.
Right.
And for me, the way that I see the coaches who are very positive, and those very energetic coaches are kind of they're at the front, they're going, come on, you just need to dig deep and catch us up. And for my client, I know that that's not something she can do.
Mm-hmm.
And for me as a coach, my approach is to drop back, meet her right where she is in that same energy,
Right.
and draft her forwards. So
Right.
bring her along with my energy, so we build energy and get back
Right.
to where we
Right.
need to be.
Right.
And that, for me, that feels, it just feels so kind and compassionate,
Right.
and just right somehow.
Right. No, that's perfect. I love that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. For our non-cyclist friends, you have the Peloton, who is a group of people, might be 100 riders. You have the breakaway group, who is up front, maybe 3 to 5, sometimes 10, depending on how group it is. And then you have the back end where they fall off the back. And the premise on cycling is that when you have 2 or more people, you can, what Sarah said was draft, which means that you have the first person who is heading the wind, and they literally slip into your slipstream. It's like this far away. They slip into your slipstream. They call that drafting. I believe it's like a 20 to 30% reduction in energy, and it makes a big difference. And what Sarah's saying is that she's able to come from the peloton, the pack, drop back to somebody who actually has fallen off, and then hook up with her, and then use that as a drafting technique to get back into the game. So I love that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And that really, really, really is that's awesome. And I think we're going to use that as a closing point. Tell these folks where they can find you, maybe online or someplace like that. Where can they find you?
Thank you, Brian. So I find me on my website. That's probably the easiest one for me to share here. So it's www.sarahlynes.co.uk.
Okay.
And I'm sure Brian will put that in the show notes for you, so that
Okay.
all the
Okay.
spelling is right. If do you have show notes? You'll have show
I
notes.
usually, well, you know what? You said that, and I got to tell you, I don't.
Ah,
But I'll spell it because I'm a good guy. It's
cool.
Sarah,
I'll let you go.
SarahLynas.co, okay, .uk. That sometimes can be confusing for us out here, but
Perfect.
that's what it is. Yeah, so let's talk about it. I did show notes for a little while, like I did notes and I
Mm.
had like some stuff, and I don't know, maybe I'm not talking to the right people, or maybe I just don't want to do it. But like, it was just a pain. So and I didn't really see a lot of people, I couldn't see a lot of people like doing it or using it. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to put that energy onto getting people like yourself to interview. I'm going to put that energy into doing another show. I'm going to put that energy into editing it a little bit, maybe knock it out. So I don't know. Maybe I
I
should.
love that. No, I
Yeah.
love that. You put your energy well, like do what feels good for you. Who
Yeah.
cares who else
Yeah.
does show notes, right? And people
Yeah,
can find me. So
somebody else said that the other day. He's like, "Well, I'll just put that in the show notes." Okay.
No, I love that you're listening to what you need to do. You put that energy somewhere else. Show notes, like that must be a real hassle.
That's
Good on
fine.
you. Love
And he
it.
said it. He said it so confidently, like, "Oh, I'll just put that in the show notes." All right, I guess you will, because I'm not. Anyway, that is some good stuff. That is Sarah Lynes. Thank you so much. The quiet self-belief coach coming at us from the UK. Again, my name is Brian Hilliard. That's Sarah Lynes saying so long, take care, and thank you guys so much for your time. Thanks for stopping by, Sarah.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
All